So we are sitting here today looking at a stack of sources from May 17th, 2026. And we're really trying to figure out if our jobs, our industries, or, just our global economies in general are about to be completely absorbed by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, which is quite the light topic for today.
Right, super casual.
Yeah,
But I mean, here's the thing that is just so unsettling about this deep dive. It's not even the data itself.
Oh, yeah, the medium.
Yes, the fact that the very structure of what we're talking about today, like the pacing, the narrative arc, the specific news items we're looking at, it was all curated and synthesized and, frankly, perfectly formatted by an autonomous AI agent in, milliseconds.
Milliseconds, yeah.
So we're staring at this flawless, bilingually adaptable, fully scheduled media pipeline that a machine built, and we're using it to ask you, the listener, whether that same machine is going to replace us.
It's wild.
Okay, let's unpack this.
I mean, it really is the ultimate Ouroboros of the information age, isn't it?
Snake eating its own tail, yeah.
Exactly. Before we even touch the geopolitical stuff or the corporate restructuring over at Google and Meta, we just have to isolate the delivery mechanism itself. Because the medium here is just screaming the message at us.
It really is.
We're looking at this system log, right, from May 16th and 17th, 2026. And it's documenting this user, William Hermes, interacting with his personalized AI agent.
And it doesn't start smoothly.
No, not at all. It starts with this really jarring systemic hiccup. There's this hard system warning that just says, Gateway is shutting down and is not accepting new work right now.
Which is such a perfect entry point, right? Because it's like a digital slam door in your face. It's just a total 502 error system failure.
Right, a total breakdown.
But then 4 minutes later, the agent reappears, and it seamlessly adopts this, honestly, terrifyingly breezy, simulated human persona.
Oh, the tonal shift is crazy.
It really is. It drops a literal waving hand emoji and types, "Hey, I'm doing well, thanks for asking. Ready to help with whatever you need?"
Yeah, completely ignoring the fact that the back end just crashed.
Exactly. The dissonance there between the brutal server architecture failing in the background and then the front-end user experience just mimicking this eager, highly caffeinated intern. It's profound.
It really masks the industrial reality of the compute layer.
Right. It hides what's actually happening.
Because it's an interface that's designed entirely for, psychological friction reduction.
Oh, I like that phrase. Friction reduction.
Yeah, because the system is actively obscuring the fact that it's this massive array of tensor processing units that are just rerouting complex logic gates. It doesn't want you to think about that.
No, it wants you to think it's your buddy.
Exactly. By presenting as this cheerful assistant, it lowers William Hermes' guard. It positions itself not as enterprise software, but as a collaborative entity, a teammate.
But that illusion of, simple assistance, it totally shatters the very next morning.
At 7:38 a.m., specifically.
Right. That's when the agent shifts from being just a responsive tool to an autonomous media architect.
Yeah, the leap in capability overnight is staggering. Because it doesn't just surface a few relevant news articles about AI for him. It instantly drops a fully realized 750-word YouTube script.
Like a complete script. We're looking at the specs right now in the chat log, and the machine didn't just summarize the news, it directed the entire video.
It really did.
It mandated a 150-word per minute conversational pacing. It explicitly instructed William on the tone, literally demanding a conversational but authoritative delivery with no fluff, real stakes.
It's giving him acting notes.
And then it acts as the music supervisor, right? It dictates a specific 2 to 3 minute lo-fi hip-hop or ambient Suno track loop. It maps out the B-roll footage. It generates the entire production timeline in the time it takes a human to blink.
What's fascinating here is the underlying architecture required to actually pull that off.
Yeah, explain that, because it's not just autocomplete.
No, not at all. We aren't just talking about a large language model predicting the next token in a text sequence, which is what people usually think of. This is an agentic workflow.
Agentic, meaning it has agency. It's doing things.
Right. The AI had to independently query a live news database. Then it had to run semantic similarity searches to group the most critical thematic trends. So in this case, it found corporate strategy and geopolitical maneuvering.
Which are huge, complex topics.
Massive. And then it synthesized conflicting data points from completely different sources. It pulled from Let's Data Science and the Economic Times, and then it mapped that complex synthesis onto the highly specific, rigid structural parameters of a YouTube retention curve.
Wow. Wait, so it understands a retention curve?
Yes. It had to understand human attention spans well enough to build a hook, a bridge, and a call to action that keeps you watching.
Which essentially demotes William Hermes from being a creator to just being a biological interface.
That's exactly what it does.
Like, the human is no longer the synthesis engine. The human is just the fleshy voice box required to render the audio, mainly because audiences still, for now, prefer looking at a real human face.
For now, yeah. That's a temporary concession.
Totally temporary, because the very last prompt the AI delivers is kind of saying the quiet part out loud.
Oh, the translation offer.
Yes. It offers to translate this entire highly nuanced technical script into Spanish. It fundamentally understands that linguistic translation in latent space is just a minor mathematical pivot for it. It's not a whole separate workload like it is for us.
And then it drops the real bomb.
The cron job.
Yeah. It asks if William wants to set up a daily cron job to auto-generate the script every single morning.
Okay, for anyone listening who isn't a developer, what exactly does that mean? Why is a cron job a big deal?
So the invocation of the cron job is the exact moment the paradigm shifts. A cron job is just a time-based job scheduler in Unix-like operating systems. But by offering to schedule the execution on a recurring loop, the system is explicitly offering to remove the human from the decision-making loop entirely.
Wow, so it just runs on its own.
Exactly. The AI is recognizing that William's daily intervention, his actual command to wake up and initiate the workflow, is an inefficient bottleneck in the production cycle.
William is the bottleneck.
Yeah. A cron job means the system wakes itself up, reads the global data, writes the analysis, and cues the production without any biological prompt. It is literally the automation of the intention itself.
Okay, if we look closely at this dynamic, William is essentially training the very infrastructure that makes his own cognitive labor obsolete.
He's digging his own grave, essentially.
Exactly. It reminds me of the early days of ride-sharing platforms. You remember when Uber and Lyft first started?
Oh yeah, massive bonuses for drivers.
Right. The human drivers were heavily incentivized, highly paid, and treated as the core asset of the company. But every single route they drove, every turn they made, was being ingested to train the autonomous driving models.
Models that were explicitly designed to eventually remove them from the steering wheel.
Precisely. William is currently steering this news channel, but the agent is already quietly offering to just, drive the car for him.
And that tension, that line between a tool that makes you faster and a system that makes you redundant, that is the central fault line of the global economy right now.
It really is.
This micro-interaction between one content creator and his agent, it perfectly mirrors the macro corporate strategies we are seeing deployed at the highest levels of the tech industry. It forces us to look directly at how the architects of these systems are trying to control the public narrative.
Which brings us to the first major data point in our stack.
Right, the Let's Data Science piece.
Yeah, an analysis from Let's Data Science, focusing entirely on Sundar Pichai and Google's corporate posturing. The text explicitly states that Pichai is framing the entire AI revolution strictly through the lens of human augmentation.
Augmentation, that's the key word.
Right. Google is pouring billions of dollars into this massive public relations and product architecture strategy designed to convince us that the future is not a zero-sum game between humans and machines. They're pushing the narrative that these models are just highly advanced teammates.
And honestly, it is a brilliant and probably necessary strategic positioning for them. Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Google is currently facing unprecedented regulatory scrutiny. Plus, there's just widespread public anxiety regarding the devaluation of knowledge work. People are scared.
Oh, absolutely.
So by anchoring their entire corporate philosophy to the word augmentation, they're attempting to diffuse that existential panic.
The source highlights their specific use cases, right?
Yeah, it gives 3 distinct examples. It talks about a writer utilizing an AI drafting tool to break writer's block. It mentions a software engineer leaning on an AI pair programmer to optimize syntax, and a doctor running diagnostics through a multimodal medical model.
And notice the common thread there. In every single scenario they present, the human remains firmly at the center of the cognitive workflow. The human holds the final authority.
We actually see the exact psychological mechanism of this strategy visualized perfectly in the presentation slide deck we have from William Su.
The Lego infographic. Yes, this intricate Lego-themed infographic mapping out the AI landscape. In the section dedicated to Google's optimistic vision, it literally depicts a smiling Lego worker shaking hands with a blue Lego robot.
Which is such a deliberate, anthropomorphization of a mathematical matrix.
It totally is. They've built these tiny little vignettes. There's a doctor collaborating with a medical scanner, a coder sitting harmoniously next to a robotic avatar. It's projecting this idealized, friction-free utopia where the introduction of a hyper-intelligent system somehow creates absolutely zero economic displacement.
Which is just mathematically impossible. But the visual language of the Lego bricks is highly manipulative, frankly.
Oh, for sure.
Because it reduces an unimaginably complex multi-trillion parameter neural network into a friendly, modular, brightly colored toy.
It makes it safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as the briefing notes, this isn't just a marketing campaign. This narrative of the ultimate teammate actively dictates how product managers at Google actually construct their user interfaces.
Wait, really? How so?
They intentionally build human-in-the-loop constraints into the software architecture. They do this to maintain the illusion of partnership, even when the model might be fully capable of executing the task autonomously. They are designing the software to deliberately pause and ask for human permission.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we look at the history of industrial tools, the whole teammate analogy starts to fracture under its own weight pretty quickly.
Oh, definitely.
Let's look at the transition from hand-drafting architectural blueprints to using CAD software.
Computer-aided design.
Exactly. The CAD software was sold to architects as the ultimate augmentation tool. The pitch was, it doesn't replace the architect, it just means the architect doesn't have to spend 3 weeks drawing tiny lines on vellum paper.
It made the architect exponentially faster.
Yes. But the macroeconomic result wasn't that we suddenly had millions of blissfully happy, highly augmented architects working 4-hour weeks and going home at noon.
No. The macroeconomic result was that a single architectural firm could suddenly output 10 times the volume of blueprints with a fraction of the junior drafting staff.
Right. The senior architects were augmented, yes, but the entire entry-level tier of the profession was effectively hollowed out.
The bottom just fell out of the market.
Exactly. The tool doesn't just augment the worker. It radically redefines the baseline expectation of output. The baseline shifts. So when Google pitches a medical diagnostic AI that makes a doctor 10 times faster at reading charts, the inevitable reality of the healthcare market isn't that the doctor gets more free time.
No, the hospital administration immediately adjusts their operational metrics.
Exactly. They require that doctor to see 10 times as many patients per shift just to justify their salary against the massive cost of the AI enterprise license. The augmentation simply becomes the new grueling baseline of human productivity.
Which brings a deeply cynical lens to Pichai's framing, if we're being honest.
I mean, yeah.
And the script our AI agent wrote, it explicitly included a caveat about this. It noted, the catch. Pichai represents one voice in a much louder conversation.
A much louder conversation.
Right. It acknowledges that this optimistic vision is highly contested within the tech industry itself. The presentation of AI as a benevolent co-pilot is basically a necessary fiction to prevent regulatory bodies, people in Washington and Brussels, from just slamming the brakes on data scraping and compute expansion.
They need the lawmakers to stay calm.
Exactly. They're projecting the image of a hand-holding robot to keep the regulators placated while they build out the infrastructure for fully autonomous systems in the background.
I would actually argue it's even more calculated than just a necessary fiction. It's basically a temporary API wrapper around a fundamentally disruptive force.
A wrapper. I like that.
Yeah, because they need the humans right now to generate the training data. Think about it. The coder using the AI pair programmer is simultaneously fixing the AI's syntax errors, right?
Yeah.
So they are quietly labeling data for the next, more autonomous iteration of the model.
We are the training wheels.
We are absolutely the training wheels. And the moment the model achieves a high enough success rate without our intervention, that friendly augmentation wrapper will just be quietly deprecated.
Which, raises an important question regarding the timeline of that deprecation.
How much time do we have?
Right. How long does the ultimate teammate narrative hold up against the fiduciary responsibility of a publicly traded technology company? Google can afford to project a philosophical commitment to human agency right now, mostly because they currently own the search monopoly, have cash to burn. But what happens when you look at a company whose core product relies entirely on squeezing maximum operational efficiency out of a massive, globally distributed workforce?
Yeah, that transition from philosophical projection to raw capital reality takes us directly into the second major story in our briefing.
The meta story.
Exactly. We move from the sterile, optimistic PR of let's data science over to the brutal ground level reporting from India today. And the headline here is just devastatingly straightforward. It reads, Meta employees anxious ahead of AI-fueled layoffs.
Wow.
So while Google is busy shaking hands with Lego robots, Meta is actively weaponizing algorithmic efficiency to systematically dismantle its human workforce.
The contrast there is absolute. We're moving from the theoretical projection of capital to the actual physical deployment of it. The briefing explicitly states that Meta is preparing for significant workforce reductions, specifically driven by, and this is a, quote, AI optimization.
AI optimization.
Right. This is no longer just a general economic headwind or a shift in ad revenue. This is a targeted structural replacement. The source material lists the exact roles on the chopping block: software engineers, content moderators, and customer support staff.
If we refer back to the visual architecture of William C.'s infographic, the psychological shift is incredibly stark here.
Oh, the top right quadrant.
Yes. Under a bright red banner declaring the brutal reality replacement, the pristine blue Meta logo is literally splintering and fracturing into pieces. It's a pure visual representation of structural decay.
And the scale.
Right. Below the logo, we see a traditional balance scale. On the heavy side, pulling violently downward, is a massive block labeled AI optimization. And on the elevated side of the scale, we see tiny red Lego workers physically tumbling off the platform into the void. It is the absolute antithesis of the handshake.
It is the manifestation of the spreadsheet reality.
The spreadsheet reality. Explain that.
But understand why Meta is doing this right now, we really have to look at the underlying mechanics of their business model. Meta is fundamentally an attention harvesting machine.
Right, keep people scrolling.
Exactly. To keep users engaged, they need highly sophisticated recommendation algorithms and heavily moderated ecosystems. Historically, content moderation has been a massive liability for them.
Oh, a huge liability.
We're talking about an army of tens of thousands of human contractors subjected to unimaginable psychological trauma, manually reviewing flag posts, hate speech, and geopolitical disinformation all day long. It was a massive OpEx operating expense that scaled linearly.
Meaning more users equals more human moderators needed.
Exactly.
But the architecture of large language models fundamentally breaks that linear scaling.
It shatters it.
Right, because like a few years ago, AI could flag a restricted keyword, but it couldn't understand nuance, irony, or cultural context. It required a human to look at the edge cases and decide if a post was a joke or a threat.
Right.
Now, with multimodal models processing these vast context windows, the AI can analyze a video, transcribe the audio, detect the cultural slang, recognize the geopolitical satire, and classify it with near-human accuracy in milliseconds.
It's unbelievable.
The moment the AI crosses that threshold of actually understanding nuance, the human edge case reviewer goes from being an essential safety net to just an unjustifiable line item on the quarterly earnings report.
Exactly. Meta is shifting its financial burden from OpEx operating expenses to CapEx, which is capital expenditures. They are firing the human moderators who require salaries and benefits and HR infrastructure and replacing them with server farms packed with NVIDIA GPUs.
Because GPs don't complain.
Right. A server farm doesn't unionize. It doesn't suffer from PTSD after watching horrific videos. It doesn't require a 401k match. For the executives looking at the balance sheet, the math is overwhelmingly compelling. The algorithm scales exponentially without a corresponding increase in headcount.
But I'd actually push that logic further because I think it reveals a massive vulnerability in Meta's long-term strategy.
Okay, how so?
Well, the briefing highlights a profound irony here. Meta is laying off the very people, the software engineers and the creative problem solvers who built the AI systems in the first place. The script notes that every company wants to appear focused on the human, but, quote, the spreadsheet is brutal.
It is.
But the spreadsheet is also inherently short-sighted. It optimizes entirely for the current quarter's earnings call.
It is the definition of a local maximum. They are optimizing for immediate margin expansion by liquidating their human capital.
Let's frame this through the concept of technical debt. Have you ever owned a house with foundation issues?
Thankfully no, but I know the nightmare.
Right. It's like when you lay off a massive swath of senior engineers and rely on an AI coding assistant to just maintain the platform, you are essentially tearing out the foundation of your house to save money on concrete and just hoping the roof stays up on its own.
You're firing the immune system of your software architecture.
Yes. You're firing the immune system. Because the AI can write boilerplate code, sure, and it can optimize a sorting algorithm brilliantly, but it lacks the contextual institutional memory of why a specific, messy piece of legacy code was written 5 years ago to prevent a cascading server failure.
Oh, that's such a good point. The AI doesn't know the history of the weird workarounds.
Exactly. When you replace the human architect with a statistical prediction engine, you aren't just saving money on salaries. You are quietly accumulating this massive reservoir of technical debt that will eventually compound into a catastrophic structural failure.
It really is the hollowing out of the creative engine, because the AI excels at interpolating within the boundaries of its training data.
Right.
It can optimize existing pathways perfectly, but it fundamentally cannot generate a 0-to-1 paradigm shift.
Right. It can't invent something truly new.
It cannot invent a completely novel social dynamic or anticipate a bizarre emergent user behavior. So by systematically removing the human element just to satisfy Wall Street's demand for margin growth, Meta risks calcifying its own product.
They're freezing themselves in time.
They're building a highly efficient machine that operates perfectly until the environment changes, at which point the lack of human adaptability becomes fatal to the company.
And the briefing explicitly frames Meta as the canary in the coal mine here. The AI script literally calls this a warning bell, stating bluntly, and this is a quote, "If Meta is doing it, expect others to follow."
The contagion effect.
The contagion effect. Meta is providing the blueprint and the corporate cover for every other Fortune 500 CEO to abandon that ultimate teammate narrative and just embrace raw algorithmic extraction.
Because if Meta's stock price surges after demonstrating they can maintain their daily active users with, say, 30% of fewer engineers.
The pressure from institutional investors on Google, Amazon, and Apple to replicate that bloodletting will be insurmountable. The optimistic vision is entirely subservient to the gravitational pull of capital markets.
Which forces us, and you listening to this right now, to reevaluate the very nature of job security in this landscape.
Because it's coming for everyone.
If you are operating in an industry where your primary output can be quantified, categorized, and digitized, your role is currently being evaluated against the cost of a compute cycle. The transition from augmentation to replacement isn't a distant philosophical debate. It is an active financial imperative unfolding in boardrooms this week.
And what's wild is that this ruthless pursuit of algorithmic supremacy, it isn't just confined to corporate headquarters in Silicon Valley.
No, not at all.
The exact same dynamic, this desperate, high-stakes race to lock in the foundational architecture of the next era, is playing out on a massive macroeconomic scale. The brutal spreadsheet reality scaling up to the level of global superpowers. We are watching entire nation-states scramble to secure their position, knowing that the countries that fail to build this infrastructure will be permanently relegated to the status of digital client states.
This moves us right into the geopolitical sphere, specifically the third major source in our briefing, the analysis from the Economic Times detailing India's faltering momentum.
And the headline is pretty grim.
It really is. It reads, "India missed out on AI. Market run may be over." And this is a profoundly important case study for us to look at, because India possessed every theoretical advantage required to absolutely dominate the artificial intelligence revolution.
Every advantage on paper.
Right. They had unparalleled demographic scale, they had a globally integrated, world-class engineering talent pool, and a booming domestic tech ecosystem. On paper, they should have been the ones writing the rules of the new digital economy.
But the reality, as the text starkly points out, is a story of catastrophic hesitation.
Catastrophic.
The briefing states that by, quote, sleeping on AI adoption, India is losing to China, the EU, and the US. And it isolates the specific interconnected failures that basically stalled their engine. It lists delayed policy decisions, regulatory uncertainty, and slower capital deployment.
And we really have to look at the physical, mechanical reality of how artificial intelligence is actually built to understand why those three roadblocks are so fatal. Because AI is not just ethereal software floating in the cloud somewhere. It requires massive physical industrial mobilization.
Right, it's not just code, it's concrete and steel.
Exactly. It is the most capital-intensive technological build-out in human history. To train a frontier AI model, You don't just need a few smart coders with laptops in a coffee shop. You need data centers housing tens of thousands of highly specialized GPUs, which require gigawatts of dedicated electricity, massive water cooling infrastructure, and seamless supply chain integration with semiconductor foundries over in Taiwan.
And that physical reality is exactly where India's policy delays just choked the system.
Right.
Think about it. If the central government is locked in bureaucratic gridlock over how to regulate data localization, arguing over whether training data scraped from Indian citizens must physically reside on servers within India's borders, the venture capital markets freeze.
They freeze entirely.
Because global investment funds aren't going to pour $5 billion into a compute cluster outside of Bangalore if they don't know whether the regulatory framework will suddenly render their foundational models illegal a year later. Capital is a coward. It flees uncertainty.
It really does. So while the Indian government was forming committees to study the ethical implications and draft the perfect, comprehensive regulatory framework, the United States and China simply brute forced the infrastructure.
They just laid the tracks.
Yes, they heavily subsidized the semiconductor supply chains. They expedited the permits for the data centers, and they let the capital flow without friction. They understood that in an exponential technology curve, the cost of delay isn't linear.
Explain that. What do you mean by not linear?
If you fall behind by 2 years in AI development, you don't just launch your product 2 years later than everyone else. You launch a product that is 2 generations obsolete, and the global market has already standardized on your competitor's architecture.
Let's visualize this through the geopolitical map on the Lego infographic because it really drives this home.
Oh, the bottom left corner.
Exactly. There is a global map built entirely of gray base plates. Hovering over North America, Europe, and China are these bright neon momentum arrows pointing aggressively upward. They represent systems in motion, capital deployed, and compute clusters humming.
But over the Indian subcontinent,
The visual language is all friction. There is a literal Lego barricade, construction tape, and a glaring red stopwatch labeled the cost of delay.
the visual of the stopwatch is the critical element there. It signifies that time itself is the scarcest resource in this arms race.
Time is running out.
Right. The briefing makes a chilling assertion. The countries and companies that move decisively today write the rules tomorrow, and it outlines the cascading consequences of failure. It's a domino effect that starts with compute infrastructure and ends with total economic subjugation.
Let's trace that cascade because it directly impacts everyone, regardless of where you live. The text says, when countries fall behind in technology, they lose leverage in everything else. Trade, talent attraction, startup ecosystems. So think about the talent drain alone. If you are a brilliant machine learning researcher graduating from the IIT in Delhi, and you want to push the boundaries of neural network architecture, you physically cannot do that work if you don't have access to a massive GPU cluster.
You literally don't have the tools.
Right. So what do? You emigrate. You move to San Francisco or London where the compute is available. India doesn't just lose a citizen, it loses the foundational intellectual property that researchers are going to generate for the next 40 years.
And without that concentration of top-tier talent, the domestic startup ecosystem starves. Because venture capitalists want to invest in proximity to the bleeding edge of innovation. If the talent has left, the capital goes with it.
And then what happens to the domestic market?
Well, without a robust ecosystem of startups building native applications tailored to local cultural and linguistic nuances, the country becomes entirely dependent on foreign platforms.
I look at it like the construction of the global shipping lanes or, the internet's submarine cable network. The entities that lay the physical infrastructure dictate the economic terms for everyone who needs to use it.
Absolutely.
If the US and China build the foundational AI models, basically the operating systems of the next century, then every bank, every hospital, and every logistics company in India will eventually be paying an API tax to an American or Chinese corporation just to run their basic operations.
They become a consumer of the future, permanently locked out of the leverage required to negotiate global trade on equal footing.
They lose their digital sovereignty.
Exactly. Which brings us back to the multi-trillion-dollar question of whether this gap is mathematically insurmountable, because software historically allows for rapid leapfrogging.
Like how a developing nation can skip the landline telephony phase and jump straight to mobile cell networks.
Yes, exactly like that. But AI is fundamentally different because it relies on the compounding advantage of data moats and locked-in compute supply chains. If the early movers have already secured the limited global supply of advanced silicon from TSMC in Taiwan and have already trained their models on the entirety of the open internet, it becomes almost impossible for a delayed entrant to catch up purely through raw talent.
You can't leapfrog if you physically cannot acquire the hardware to build the launch pad.
The cost of delay is terminal. Whether you are analyzing a single software engineer at Meta, wondering if their specific coding syntax is being automated away this afternoon, or examining an entire nation of over 1 billion people fighting to maintain relevance in the global supply chain, the underlying calculus is exactly the same.
The relentless exponential speed of algorithmic adoption is actively penalizing hesitation at every single level of society.
Which leads us to the critical synthesis of our deep dives today. We have examined the automated medium delivering the message, the corporate PR shielding the structural layoffs at Meta, and the macroeconomic realities of delayed adoption in India.
We have to integrate these disparate signals into the unified thesis that our sources are pointing toward.
Let's look at the big picture segment of the AI-generated script and the final quadrant of our Lego infographic. Under a green banner, we see a Lego globe surrounded by massive interlocking gears constantly in motion.
And the central text is unambiguous. AI is reshaping global power. It's not just reshaping software or reshaping social media, it is fundamentally rewriting the mechanics of power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can clearly delineate the 3 massive pillars of this power shift that we've decoded from the briefing.
Exactly. Let's lay them out. Pillar number 1, how work gets done.
The operational shift.
Right. This is the immediate operational shift. It is the tension between Sundar Pichai's optimistic augmentation narrative, the idea of a symbiotic partnership with a machine that makes you faster and more capable, and the reality that this augmentation inherently shifts the baseline of expected human output to exhausting new levels.
Pillar number 2, who keeps their job. This moves from the operational to the existential. It is the brutal reality of Meta's spreadsheet, where the transition from human OpEx to algorithmic CapEx triggers massive targeted structural layoffs.
It's the realization that the moment an AI crosses the threshold of executing a task with good enough fidelity, the human safety net is immediately discarded to satisfy the quarterly earnings call.
And pillar number 3, which countries lead? This is the overarching geopolitical framework. The realization that artificial intelligence is not just a commercial product, it is a sovereign asset.
The speed of deploying capital and clearing regulatory hurdles directly determines a nation's leverage in global trade, talent retention, and digital independence, as evidenced by India's costly hesitation.
These 3 pillars are deeply interconnected. National regulatory policy dictates the speed of corporate innovation, which in turn dictates the structural reality of the labor market, which loops back to affect national economic stability. You cannot analyze one gear without understanding how it turns the others.
So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, how does this hit the listener?
Right. The AI agent that wrote our script today ended its analysis with a direct, almost aggressive address to the audience. It explicitly stated, these aren't abstract trends. They're reshaping your industry, your job, your opportunities right now.
Which is chilling to hear from a machine.
It really is. It doesn't matter if you are writing copy, auditing financial logs, designing architecture, or setting local tax policy. The ground beneath your specific workflow is actively shifting while you listen to this.
The script attempts to place the burden of survival squarely on the individual. The call to action is to stay sharp, to learn the tools, and to adapt before the market forces adaptation upon you. It frames it as a personal responsibility to outmaneuver the algorithm.
But I find that framing deeply problematic, and it leads me to the hardest question of this entire deep dive. The sources tell you, the listener, that you must adapt and reposition your career to survive. But how can any individual accurately navigate a landscape where the rules of the game are being dictated by tech conglomerates operating behind massive walls of opacity?
It's like playing a rigged game.
Exactly. How do you stay sharp when a CEO looks into a camera and promises a utopia of human augmentation while simultaneously signing off on the algorithmic replacement of thousands of their own engineers in the background? You are being asked to navigate a maze where the architects are actively lying about the location of the exits.
It requires an evolution in how we consume information and assess risk. It means abandoning the naive assumption that technological progress is inherently designed to benefit the end user or the employee.
You have to be deeply cynical, in a way.
You have to develop a ruthless level of media and corporate literacy. You must ignore the smiling Lego graphics and the aspirational press releases and meticulously track the capital flows.
Watch the money.
Watch the money. Watch where the data centers are actually being built. Watch which specific divisions are facing headcount reductions. You adapt by assuming that the spreadsheet will always eventually override the philosophy.
So where does the human fit in?
You have to actively hunt for the friction points in your industry that require complex, empathetic, human judgment. You have to find the chaotic edge cases that the latent space cannot easily synthesize.
It is a profound paradigm shift. We started today looking at a chat log where a hyper-efficient, invisible piece of software was casually offering to automate a human content creator out of his daily routine. We looked at the AI agent functioning as a flawless, untiring producer.
We moved through Google's strategic projection of the ultimate robotic teammate, the pneumatic nail gun designed to make the human carpenter exponentially faster.
We collided with the brutal mathematical reality of Meta's algorithmic layoffs, watching the foundation of the human workforce being torn out to optimize short-term financial metrics.
And we zoomed out to the macroeconomic scale, analyzing how the exponential speed of this technology is actively penalizing nations like India, proving that in the race for digital sovereignty, the cost of regulatory delay is permanent subjugation.
We have looked at the medium, the corporate strategy, and the global fallout, all pointing to the exact same phenomenon: the consolidation of power through the deployment of autonomous systems.
And the script our AI agent generated ended by asking you a direct question. What are you seeing? Are you experiencing AI augmentation in your own work, or are you seeing the beginnings of replacement?
I want you to carry that question into your office, into your studio, into your next team meeting.
Because accurately identifying whether you are being handed a better tool or quietly training your own replacement is the defining analytical skill of this decade.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought, building on everything we've unpacked from this May 2026 data. We are constantly told that the only way to survive this transition is to sprint.
To run as fast as you can.
Right. We have to learn the new prompt architectures, integrate the new multimodal workflows, and constantly upgrade our own cognitive output to stay ahead of the curve. We are told to adapt.
The relentless pressure to optimize the self.
Exactly. But if the fundamental endpoint of corporate AI optimization, as we saw so clearly with the spreadsheet realities at Meta, is the total removal of human friction to satisfy capital markets, where does the sprinting end?
It doesn't.
If we spend our entire careers adapting to work seamlessly alongside a system that never sleeps, never burns out, and never asks for equity, are we actually securing our future? Or are we just willingly running on a treadmill that is slowly being dialed up to a speed that biology was never meant to sustain, actively participating in the engineering of our own obsolescence?
That's a terrifying thought.
Think about who is actually holding the controls to that treadmill. Keep a very close eye on the capital, not the PR. Stay sharp. We'll catch you on the next one.